So the bottom line is the National Council of Raza, which wants to eliminate a lot of the immigration laws that we have, wants to give amnesty to the illegal immigrants. If you're against that and you want to fight that policy in our country, they've got $5 million of your money that they're using to fund their organization. Meanwhile, you and I have to go to work every day. And we have to try to do that. We have to try to squeeze this in on a weekend or at night or whenever we can around our family and our civic responsibilities. So when the National Council of Raza got that first earmark for $5 million, it was no longer their money going in. Because what they do is they suck in our taxpayer money that way, because out of that $5 million, they fund the next round of donations. In National Council of Raza's case, it was $160,000 the next election cycle. And that went into Congress again. Barbara Boxer got them a second $5 million earmark. Last 2 years out of the budget, $5 million each year. And so at that point, that percentage of benefits just keeps going in, and this cycle just keeps going around where they just keep, every time they get a benefit out of the government, they take a portion of that so that they can keep funneling in the next round. And meanwhile, if you and I decide we want to try and help somebody get elected that'll basically commit to stop this, we give that donation to them, we don't get anything back. If we want to give another donation another time, we've got to go to work instead of taking your tax dollars like the other side has been doing. So now the question is how do we fix this? And we would propose, here's fundamental fix number one. If big money's winning because Congress has altered our tax and budgeting policies, it's self-evident that the solution requires we return to that original purpose. We have to return to funding government services, not special interest groups. If that's the cause of the problem, that's the solution to the problem. Now, it's a lot harder to do. It's going to be a lot harder to do than it is to say that, but there is no other solution. And when you think about that being the solution, the funding government services, not special interest groups, you realize what you have is a systemic problem. If you realize it's a systemic problem, the first thing you're going to understand is that it's not a problem with the Democratic Party being in control. And it's not a problem with the Republican Party being in control, because no matter which one's in control, as I just showed you, they're all funded by the same people. And if you think about it, Barack Obama was not the one who started the bailouts. That was a Republican administration started the bailouts. Okay, this problem has been going on for decades now, and has really gotten bad since 1974 when they implemented the current budgeting process. Prior to 1974, this is not the current budgeting process is not something that's been around since the Constitution. It's not something Lincoln and Douglas would have debated about. It's only been around for the last 30 years. If it's a systemic problem, I can also tell you the solution is not a third party or third party candidates, because we're dealing with a system, not an individual problem. And so we need to come together, no matter, I love this picture that kind of represents we the people, because it shows people at different steps and different levels, and no matter how you view us, if you view us across the economic spectrum, if you view us across the educational spectrum, our circumstances in life, we're all at different stages, we're all at different places in our life, but we have to come together as we the people. Because here's the one thing, if 1/12 of 1% of American adults are funneling all the money into the system, the other 99% of us, we certainly outnumber them with votes. All we have to do is come together. And so we would propose this to you. If this is what we want, this is the equation we want. We want tax money going in and government services coming out, period. But if instead we're stuck with this, where instead of government service, we've got all these benefits coming out to the special interest groups who use our money over and over again against us in that cycle, then we got to fix this equation. And if we're going to fix the equation, you have to know where to start. Because right now, we are wasting tremendous amounts of energy, effort, time, and resources trying to stop this part of the equation. We're trying to figure out how to keep money from going in. And so in the form of campaign finance reform laws or public financing of elections, we're trying to figure out, maybe we could set it up where you can only donate to a candidate if you live in the state that they represent, right? All these different ways we're trying to keep money from going in. I'm here to tell you, and as I'll show you in a minute, it's a failed approach. Okay? Number one, it historically hasn't worked, and I don't think it can work. And we'll show you why, because fundamental truth number 3 is as long as there's a large enough financial reward to be had, big money's going to find a way to get it. A recent study by the University of California, Pepperdine, for the 2006-2007 budget year found that special interest groups on average were getting a 22,000% return on investment for their donations. The amount of benefits they were getting out compared to the donations going in, a 220 times ratio, $220 out for every $1 going in. If there's a large enough financial incentive to be had, big money's going to find a way to get it, and that's going to lead to fundamental truth number 4 is every time you come up with a campaign finance reform, it's going to result in an equal and opposite reaction to get around that reform. They're going to find a way to get that money. And I'm going to give you an example. We call it Reform Sidestepping 101. We're going to take a look at a Republican named Duke Cunningham from California and a Democrat named Alan Mollahan from West Virginia. The reason I'm going to show you a Republican and a Democrat is, as you recall, this is a systemic problem. It's not a Democratic or a Republican problem. So I want to use these two people as examples of why campaign finance reform laws are not something we should be spending our time on. Let's start with Duke Cunningham. When Duke was elected to Congress, he had a house in San Diego, but he wanted to live in Washington, D.C. So he wanted to sell his house. And in 2005, the appraised value of that house was $975,000. Duke had a friend come up to him who bought his house for $1.6 million. Okay? Now, at that point, you can sell your house for anything you want. This wouldn't violate any campaign finance reform laws. And at that point, when he bought that home, Duke Cunningham was ahead $625,000 ahead of his appraised value on his home. Well, meanwhile, 30 days later, this friend sold the house. Guess how much he sold the house for? He sold the house for $975,000 30 days later. So in his 30 days that he held the house, he lost $625,000. What a stupid businessman. Okay? But I want to point out, this wouldn't violate a single campaign finance reform law. Now, Duke had a second problem, though. Now that he sold his home, he needed a place to live. But fortunately for Duke, he had bought a yacht in 1997 for $200,000. Funny thing, that same friend came along in 2002, 5 years later, bought the same yacht for $600,000. Now, I don't know how many of you own a boat. I've never seen a boat appreciate in 5 years. I certainly haven't seen it appreciate triple the value. And not only that, the boat wasn't in very good condition because that same guy then went in and put $100,000 in renovations into that boat. And then he let Duke Cunningham live there for rent-free.